Welcome everybody back to the Friar Talk podcast and YouTube channel. For today's video, we're going to be talking about some recent comments made by Kevin Acee of the San Diego Union Tribune. So he basically came out, and I think it was a part of his quote. So I don't think this was the full thing that he said, but basically he said he doesn't know if the Padres are going to be able to afford Joe Musgrove. Doesn't mean they're not going to be able to afford Joe Musgrove, or that they don't want him back or anything like that, but that he basically questioned their ability to be able to afford him. So we wanted to talk about, can they afford him? Does he fit into the plans? So Isaac, what do you think about that? Do you think that the Padres are going to be able to either extend him during the season, I guess you'd say, but more of like re-sign him in the offseason?
Yeah, so there's a couple little nuggets in that Kevin Acee interview from earlier today. The main one I think that was talked about was Joe Musgrove, and are we going to be able to afford to bring him back? Because Kevin Acee's not entirely optimistic that we will be able to. We actually made an episode about this not that long ago, saying that 19 to 20 million is probably the average that we'd be willing to pay Joe Musgrove. That's his estimated value on Spot Track, and we thought that was perfect. The way he's performing right now, he might price himself out of that range. You might be going up 25 plus $1 million for him. I think the Padres can't afford that. There's going to be a lot of guys off the books next year. Will Myers, I think, 20 million off the books. There's a couple more guys, I forgot who. But there's supposed to be a lot of money. So I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about, but I know the one thing he said was, even though they do have a lot opening up next year, they don't want to blow it all on one resource. They want to use it on multiple resources. Um, those multiple resources could be Sean Manaea, Mike Clevenger. There's a couple guys that need to be re-signed. Maybe not need, but one of the needs that has to be re-signed is Joe Musgrove. I understand it might be tough with 25 million plus, especially with this performance. Hasn't lost a start. Is essentially our ace right now. Yeah, he might price himself out of San Diego. I do think he'd be the kind to take a hometown discount, but if we're just looking at it from the books, just the book standpoint, we do have enough to extend Joe Musgrove. Now, it's a matter of, do the Padres want to use that money on one resource that has proven to be a great pitcher? He's 7-0, or like 5 to 7-0 right now. I don't exactly know. He's been our ace. He's been our most consistent guy. He started every single one of his starts, and he's been fantastic in a Padres uniform. Do you want to use it on that resource, or do you want to use it on multiple resources to bolster the bullpen, the keep around Manaea or Clevenger, or both? What do you want to use those resources on? That's a tough one for me to answer. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I love Joe Musgrove, but from a fan standpoint, I want to keep Joe Musgrove 100% because he's honestly a fan favorite. He's one of my favorites too. From a business standpoint, you could see why they're having a tough time saying, committing to the idea of him being on this roster for the foreseeable future. But if I were to choose, I would of course want him in a Padres uniform.
So, like you were saying, he's been Mr. Reliable for the Padres. He hasn't missed a start. He broke out last year. He was the ace of the team. He's been the ace of the team so far. I don't think he's gone a game less than 6 innings this entire season, which I know multiple other starters have. He hasn't really gotten rocked once. I mean, he's just Mr. Reliable, and you can't afford to have a pitcher on that team this year and then not have the foreseeable future. It's just one of those things like, okay, yeah, Score is succeeding at the MLB level. Will he be able to maintain a full season like Joe Musgrove did last year, where he didn't miss a start and hell even threw in someone's place because they couldn't finish their start? You have Clevenger, who's going off injury, Manaea, who's been pretty good. He's been pretty consistently 5-6 innings. You have Snell. I mean, you're going to lose a couple of those guys, but if you can cling on to Joe Musgrove, I think you're going to be fine. I mean, you're going to need at least one guy that's going to throw 200 innings, and Joe Musgrove has proven to be that guy. I mean, I don't know who else on this team can. We have injury concerns with Darvish. We'll see how Cleve does by the end of this year. We'll see how Snell does by the end of this year and see how Manaea does. But realistically, if I had to choose one of those guys, right now I'm choosing Musgrove. I mean, he's the hometown kid. He threw the Padres' first no-hitter. He's not missed a start like we all said. It's got to be Joe Musgrove. You got to keep him. I mean, he's just a good guy to have around the clubhouse. Fans love him. you can make room for him. I know we have a lot of issues with the bullpen right now. We're also going to have a lot of guys that are coming back from injury that, are going to be on rookie deals still. We still have Michelle Baez. We still have Adrian Morejon. We're going to still have Ray Kerr. So we can afford to let some guys go, spend the money on Musgrove, and then fix the problems within. So, yeah, we can afford Joe Musgrove.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting conversation because I think the idea of can we afford him? Yeah, I mean, in theory, yes, you definitely can. You're having enough money free up in the offseason. But then, Isaac, you bring up a lot of the points. Hey, there's a lot of guys. There's still holes on this team. There's also Sean Manaea, also Mike Clevenger that are free agents. And you start thinking, okay, there's a lot of question marks there. There's a lot of things that this team should go after. Obviously, the outfield is not a good thing right now, and you're losing Will Myers, who's probably – I'm going to say I think he's probably your best outfielder right now. You can make the case, I guess, for Jerkson's kind of like hot start, but he's not hitting 200, he's still struggling in some ways. But he's been great fielding-wise, so you can bring that up. But, there's definitely big question marks there, right? Well, the biggest question marks for this team, the biggest question mark is the future of the starting pitching. Without a doubt. If you're looking at, okay, well, we're still going to have Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado. We're going to have guys under control. We have all these prospects coming out. Look at the pitchers. Probably the only guy in the minor leagues right now that isn't there's some great teenagers, and we talked about them when we had the prospects. But when you're talking about guys that could potentially be up in a year, 2 years from now, the only guy that I'm confident in is Robert Gasser. Because Mackenzie Gore has been called up. So, okay, you have those three guys that are free agents, and then the next year, Snell's a free agent, and Darvish is a free agent. So that leaves you with Mackenzie Gore and Nick Martinez. You have major question marks. So you're gonna have to sign someone, and if there's someone that is very obvious to sign out of this group right now, I think it's very clearly Joe Musgrove. Then the question becomes, well, what if you have to, sign Joe Musgrove if his deal is close to Clevin Manaea's combined, which could be a possibility. I'm guessing that Sean Manaea and Joe Musgrove will end up making close money. I think Joe Musgrove is going to make a little bit more, but I don't think it's going to be a huge difference. I do think that there's a good chance that Mike Clevenger kind of comes back on a prove-it deal, but I still think you could go and bring Mike Clevenger back and then also sign Joe Musgrove. You're going to be banking a lot on guys like C.J. Abrams to play through the farm, and you're going to be banking on maybe Robert Hassel to be ready next year. I don't know. I think that's a lot early, but I think the biggest thing kind of with this, though, is you might have to trade some people and give up some field, some bats, prospect bats, because you're going to have to free up money. You're absolutely going to have to. And you look at some of the deals on this team, Jurickson Profar makes $7-8 million. I mean, you have a bullpen right now of 5 injured players that are making $20-something million. It's bad. You have a lot of guys that are injured and aren't contributing. So you might have to eat it on some of those deals and trade some of these guys in the last year of their contract to be able to sign Joe Musgrove. I think it's worth it. I think you absolutely have to bring him back. So I'm completely on board with bringing him back. But I don't know. Anything else you guys want to add?
Yeah, you guys know I both really want to bring him back, and I will exclude one thing. I mean, I don't want to bring in, he's from San Diego, even though I love that he's from San Diego. I love that. I think it's awesome. But like you said, from a business standpoint, if he's, let's say Manaea and Clevenger are even just a bit more, a couple million more combined, I mean, you got to make a business decision and decide that, well, I'm just going to keep them both. And unfortunately, you might have to let them walk, which sucks. But when you look at it, when you're looking at the rotation, ultimately you do need one, especially with baseball right now and the NL and the Dodgers and all these good rotations in baseball. Teams are starting to stack their rotations 1 through 5. You need a good rotation from top to bottom. Essentially, if we were to re-sign Joe Musgrove and let both of those guys walk, it would be Joe Musgrove. How long do we have Yu Darvish for? Another year or two after this? Yu Darvish and aging Yu Darvish. 1 more year after this. Blake Snell, I believe, is the same, correct? Blake Snell is the same. So Joe Musgrove, Yu Darvish, Blake Snell, Mackenzie Gore. Nick Martinez, which is pretty good, right? And then after that, you lose Blake Snell and Yu Darvish. And now you have Joe Musgrove, Mackenzie Gore, Nick Martinez, Ryan Weathers, and Robert Gasser. Maybe Robert Gasser. I mean, that's a tough one. You set yourself up for future success for the immediate future, but in the long term, you're not really setting yourself up for much success. So it's a matter of how much is he going to ask? How much is he going to take? And as much everybody knows, honestly, I'm probably going to get ripped for this video. But when you look at it, you're probably going to have to front load his contract. And then you don't have money for other resources. If you backload his contract, you're getting right into the thick of Tatis's contract. So I don't know, man. I would I really want Joe back, but hopefully they figure something out, because I would hate to lose Joe Musgrove. I hope we keep him around, but we got to have a good rotation for the future.
In the immediate future, you have Hosmer for the next 2 years. His contract goes down to $13 million. You still have Jake Cronenworth on a rookie contract. You'll have a combination of a few outfielders that you get to try out. And worst case scenario, our farm system is deep enough that you can trade for guys that are on cheap contracts. We've done it multiple times before. Don't know we're discounting Preller here. Preller always goes out and makes moves, whether or not they be good or bad, or whether or not it's a completely one-sided trade. Preller usually does a pretty good job at bringing in people on cheap contracts. So, like I said, you can afford him. You can get rid of guys in the system that realistically have zero place in the future. We have a ton of middle infielders that they'll probably pan out to be average to above average MLB players, but they're locked. We have Manny Machado at third for how many years? We have Tatis at short for how many years? We're going to have either Abrams or Cronenworth at second for the foreseeable future, and then Haas for the next 3 years at least. That's if they don't bring him back again. So realistically, some of these middle infielders, they're SOL. You can trade them away. You can bring in some cheaper contracts, or you could use it to get rid of a player contract that isn't performing on the team. So, like I said, you can still afford it. You can still bring guys in. There's a lot of flexibility here to bring Joe Musgrove back. And whether or not you have to trade some prospects away to get some cash like they were going to do with Hosmer, that's okay. We have the guys to do it. There's always a possibility that Joe Musgrove can be brought back on a reasonable contract. You got to. There's too many possibilities where he comes back and the Padres still have money. There's so many different ways you can do that. You got to keep him.
Yeah, and I do think that I think it's worth it if you have to kind of trade some of the farm this offseason and potentially go and get a couple impact bats and then be banking on a couple young guys to also come up and produce. We've been talking about that so much. You need some of these younger guys to end up producing. You need at least one of Campusano, Abrams, and Hassel to be a very good player. At least one. And there's other guys too that are going to be coming up, but I think those are the three names that we definitely talk about the most. But in terms of Joe Musgrove, I think you have to kind of adjust the contracts, like you're saying, Chase, whether that's trading for a guy that's on a cheap deal or moving a guy that's on an expensive deal to a different team while packaging prospects with him. But I do think that there's ways to do it. And I don't think – I just think that, when we're looking last year where they didn't have any money and they were just can we trade Hosmer? Can we trade Myers? Can we please trade one of them? And they just couldn't ever get it done. They're not going to be in that spot. So I don't think – I think it's way too early to just assume, the Padres can't afford him. And I don't think you're saying that either, Isaac. I think it's super fair that you bring up, bringing two guys back in a lot of cases, it gives you more depth. And look at everyone that's listening knows the Padres have been completely burned by pitching depth in the past. That's why this season's so awesome. Well, you have 3 starting pitchers that are going to be free agents. So that's the big question. So hopefully they're able to retain him. I hope they work something out. I know people are saying Joe will give the hometown discount. I don't know if you want to bank on that. I don't think he owes that to anyone. I kind of do think he will, but not I don't think hometown discount is what a lot of people think. I think it's a few million bucks. I don't think it's that he's still going to cost a pretty penny and he deserves it too. So I want to see Joe Musgrove get paid, and I do want to see him get paid in San Diego. But that's going to do it for today's video. tomorrow we're going to have an episode out on Ha-seong Kim. Chase, you want to add one more thing?
Yes, do not think that Joe Musgrove is going to give the same hometown discount that Joe Ramirez gave the Guardians. That was ridiculous. Don't expect that.
Yes, that was insane. And I think we talked about that one time in a live stream too, where like, why did this dude say he passed up $100 million to stay in Cleveland? That's insane. But yeah, so I think that's gonna do it for today's episode. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow talking about Ha-seong Kim.